Welcome to Career Cravings with your hosts, Dev Ramcharan and Megan Reed. If you crave a better and more satisfying career, this show is for you. We're broadcasting live on Bold Radio Station every week. Now, here are your hosts, Dev and Megan.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Career Cravings. I'm Megan Reed, and I'm here with my co-host, Dev Ramcharan, and we're both coming to you live from Toronto, Canada. We're here tonight with our guest, Phil Jarvis, and he is speaking with us from New Brunswick, Canada, so he's a few time zones away. And tonight is a really important episode. It really hits to the core or to the heart of the purpose of Career Cravings, which is really to give people and give you, the listeners, insight into different careers and how they play out in real life. And it's all really about that coming to a good understanding of what different careers are really all about in the world that we live in. And so this is a really important episode, especially for parents out there to be listening to, because we're going to be discussing the education system in Canada and some of the changes that Phil and others that are working closely with him would recommend be made to the education system. And we'll also touch on why these changes are so important for our youth and really Canada as a whole. So before we dig into all of this important content, I'd like to welcome you to the show, Phil.
Well, thank you, Megan.
You're welcome. To start off tonight, can you just start by telling the guests a little bit about your career path and a few of the highlights along the way, just so they have a sense of who you are and what you do and the path that you came along to get to where you're at?
Yes, I'd be very happy to. So I'm originally from British Columbia. I was born in Nanaimo and sort of went to school, grew up in South Burnaby, British Columbia. And as I graduated, and I, like so many kids, had the occasional assignment of what are you going to be when you grow up, and the constant questions from all adults, and advice from a counselor that, I was a male and I was an honor roll student, so obviously I should be an engineer. I kind of took that at face value and got accepted into the military college system in Canada and graduated. 5 years later, 3 years in Saint Jean, Quebec, and 2 years in Kingston, Ontario, at the Royal Military College, and then I was commissioned officer in the armed forces for about 6 years after that, and it was really quite amazing. I mean, I was chief mountain climbing instructor for the Canadian Forces in Banff, Kananaskis, Lake Louise. I did adventure training trips and survival trips in the Canadian Arctic, served with the United Nations in Cyprus at the time. And really it was a great cowboys and Indians life that I was enjoying, but my young wife wasn't too excited about the fact that I was gone all the time, and she wasn't that comfortable in the officers' mess with the officers' wives. So I basically left the military and joined the federal government in Ottawa in a program. Well, employment and immigration was the department. And my first mandate was to develop information and by the way, I went there because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I left the I still wasn't sure what I wanted to be when I grew up, even though I had a degree now and a commission in the armed forces. So I joined a group called Occupational and Career Analysis and Development in headquarters in Ottawa and produced career information, first in print media, and then suggested that information could be computerized, and ended up developing a computer system for 550 employment centers across Canada called Choices. And it turned out to be, when I finished developing the program, I was invited to present on the program in Washington, D.C. to Americans. They were so impressed that I got an invitation soon after that to go to Florida and present at the Super Bowl of computer systems. So the 6 major U.S. systems at the time. Now remember, this is late 1970s. We're talking mainframe computers hooked up via acoustic couplers and telephones and so on. A whole different world entirely. we all have much more power in our smartphones than 100 of those big mainframe computers we were using back then. But they did. 350 educators from across Florida had a chance to listen to the developers of each of the 6 U.S. systems and the Canadian system, and actually sit at a dumb terminal and interact with the computer. And at the end of a couple of days, 93% of them voted to adopt the Canadian system, not any of the American systems. So Florida was the first adoption of the system. North Carolina was the second, Kansas was the third, and then all of a sudden Canadian provinces, where we actually developed this and piloted initially, decided the Americans like it must be pretty good. So, and then it basically went across Canada. And I had the pleasure of working with education departments everywhere across Canada and many U.S. states, and ultimately in Holland and other countries as well. So that was the start of my career, and I got into the career business really because I didn't know what I wanted to do myself, and I thought researching careers might be a good way to find out. From there, I went on to the government. It was a very short Joe Clark government, 6-month government back then in the late 1970s that decided it was going to privatize as much as it could, and it did manage to privatize this computer system, Choices, that I created. And 3 months after the company, of the 46 that competed, the company that won that came to me and said, "We don't know what to do with this. Would you join us and head up our research and development and marketing?" So I left the federal government, went to a $500 million a year company, Canadian company, and spent 10 years with them, mostly in Canada and the U.S., but and developing that into a $20 million a year business. So, and eventually all schools in Canada, and it was privatized basically because K-12 is not a federal jurisdiction. I was with the federal government. They couldn't justify constantly supporting, and educators decided they wanted this even more than employment counselors in these employment centers across Canada, because it actually slowed down the process for them. They really had to help people prepare for the computer system and think hard about what came out of the computer. Otherwise, it was garbage in, garbage out, and that slowed down the process. And of course, managers were incented based on the number of people their staff saw every day, and this slowed things down. So it didn't go all that well in employment centers, although the service was much better for the clients. But the schools just gobbled it up. So literally, that program went to virtually every school in Canada, English and French, every province and territory, and I stayed with it for 10 years, and then frankly got tired of the company constantly saying we need more money. So I came back and proposed something that I was thinking would be called the Canada Career Information Partnership, a coalition of the federal government and all the provinces and territories to collaborate. Because I've discovered early in my career that if it comes from BC, Alberta doesn't want it. If it comes from Ontario, not everybody in Ontario wants it, but nobody else wants it. And so the only way to beat that, and I found that with Choices, was engage them all in building it so they all have bragging rights in it, and it has features that they felt were really important for them. So the idea of the coalition then was to, the litmus test on any project for this coalition, funded by the federal government, but participated in by all the provinces, was if any province doesn't go thumbs up on the idea, it's not a national project. So you can imagine there were some pretty good ideas that didn't pass that litmus test, but the ones that did were spectacular. So went on to build the Real Game series, the Blueprint for Life Work Designs, Canada Work Infonet, Smart Options, the Edge magazine, which basically all went to almost all schools across Canada, public libraries, employment centers, and other kinds of operations. And I've also found that anything that turned out to be successful in Canada, others wanted it. The Americans wanted it. And with the Real Game, for example, that went ultimately to the ministries of education in 12 countries. So without ever trying to sell to them, they just somehow heard, fellowship, study trip, something. They came to Canada, saw this thing, and said, wow, that could really work for us. Can we try it? So they joined the international partnership. So that went well until the federal government changed, priorities changed, and funding dropped. And with those projects, we had never figured out, that was through a not-for-profit partnership, basically how to make them commercial, and we weren't interested in it. We thought it was basic public service, helping all Canadians, students and well beyond students, to get some sense of future direction and where their next stepping stone might be, in their life path. And so when the government funding died, all of those initiatives kind of withered. They're all still going one way or another in a number of places across Canada, but lost a lot of momentum when the federal government pulled out, and then the provinces had a hard time justifying staying in since it was their jurisdiction anyway, so they just went their own way. So this is really, and then I joined Career Cruising as those things were going down, and I've been part of the executive management team with Career Cruising for the last 5 years, nearly 6 years actually, and that's the premier online computer-based career database and learning database in Canada, and the number one program in the United States, actually, even though it's a Canadian program, 100% based out of Toronto. But now I've decided that I really like to focus what's left of my career, and it's been a long and pretty good one, on back to the not-for-profit again and reigniting that flame for collaboration across Canada. We don't have a national Department of Education. We have no national leadership in education. We have 13 jurisdictions all trying to reinvent their own wheels. And it's basically, and this may not sound right to educators, but it's basically educators trying to fix something that they don't know is broken. So it really is going to take educators on board, obviously, and adult minds as well as young minds, young adolescent minds who know what they like about school and what they hate about school. And it's also going to take employers in the business community, because ultimately that's where the talent is going to land. But also First Nations, community-based organizations, United Way, Junior Achievement, so many good players. So that's kind of the trajectory of my life pretty quickly, Megan.
Well, that is a great summary, and I really think it gives our listeners a flavor of the experience and authority you have around the conversation we're going to have tonight. So I'm excited that you shared all of that, and I think just to highlight Career Cruising, if parents or students aren't aware of that program, they should check it out, because it is a wealth of information about various careers that are out there, and we know that exposure to different careers really impacts the choices students make. So it's one really useful resource. So before we dig in, though, to kind of your purpose now and where you're focused, Phil, what I'm hearing through your career is you have a lot of various experience, from being in the armed forces, then going into federal government. You're developing computer programs, you're marketing. You've had a lot of different changes around your life, and it sounds like some of them quite strategic. I'm not sure if all of them were that way, but how did you find your way to what it is that you want to do now? How do you know this is where it's at for you at the end of your career?
The most satisfaction I've had in my career has always been in basically venues or opportunities where amazingly passionate, bright, experienced, capable people come together to innovate, to create something new. And so, with all of the projects I mentioned, we always had national advisory committees, and this wasn't just a rubber stamp group. This was an amazing group of people who really knew their stuff on any of these projects, had access to the best people in their provinces, and would draw upon the knowledge of the people around them, and then come together. And we would have people from every province and territory together for 2 or 3 days. And work our butts off, but it's all mind and it's all fun, because we all know we're creating something that's really going to touch an awful lot of people, hundreds of thousands of young people and not so young people. And that we're part of something that is a movement that's national, at least national. On some of the projects that I mentioned, those groups would be people from every province and territory in Canada, but also many U.S. states, from Australia, from New Zealand, from England, Scotland, Wales, France, Germany, because when you have an opportunity to do something that's leading edge in the world and work with people who are leading edge in the world, there aren't many good people that don't want to be part of that. And if there's some basic funding to help facilitate pulling people together into kind of a safe playground where they can leave their egos behind and leave their even their organizations and their logos behind, and just focus on what would make the most difference to kids at this level, in terms of engagement, in terms of real learning, passion, and so on. So I just can't think of anything more fun than that. It's incredibly demanding, but with these groups, we would work really hard during the days, and it didn't matter whether the accents were from the South in the United States or French Canadian or a Maori from New Zealand or Scottish brogue. When it came down to it, the words that came out of the mouth and the ideas and the passion and the needs were so common. They're global. The issue of trying to figure out what your purpose is in life and what your pathways might be. And parents helping their kids figure that out, and spouses helping each other. This is, we're all entering a global village now. The world is not so different from one place to another, and the opportunities are global in this flat world of ours. So that's why I know, rather than being with a company, even a great company that's competing with other companies for limited resources and time and all the rest of it, the most rewarding times in my career have been working with partners and coming up with something brand new and testing it together concurrently everywhere across Canada, and then getting feedback from students, teachers, parents, community members, and so on, building that into an even better version than what was piloted, and then giving it to the provinces. And then you don't need sales reps, you don't need much marketing, because it is the Department of Education, after all, that has been the champion in each of the regions across Canada. So they draw on their networks for implementation, for training, support, promotion, and so on. And you can reach so many more kids, so many more classrooms, so much quicker if the whole country pulls together.
Bill, what's really encouraging is the passion and the obvious warm concern that underlies the work that you actually do to be able to help kids or help people across the country. You talked about innovation. There's something that's a development that causes some concern at the same time as it presents limitless possibilities, and that is the impact of artificial intelligence as far as people's careers are concerned. So I work in an IT division at Toronto Dominion Bank, and
wow.
one of the VPs I've reported to indicated to me, he said, he's been advising his kids who are teens and preteens, do not choose any kind of a career whatsoever that a computer or a program could replace you in. So have you, as you've been developing the overall framework, the infrastructure, the system that you're working on, been taking on board some of the transformation of the workplace that could be occurring with AI?
Absolutely. That has to be bottom line. We all hear so often now that the careers that middle school kids, 50% of the careers that middle school kids will be entering don't exist now. But a lot of that is going to be through, technology and innovation, and it's just accelerating. So you're right, with artificial intelligence becoming more and more prominent, smart machines, robots replacing humans, they're doing that in in work roles that are very precise. Often they're predictable, they're repetitive tasks, and machines can do them. They can do them for 24 hours with maybe an oil change occasionally, but they don't get headaches and they don't need breaks and they're never hungry. So, I think it's good advice not to target tasks in any industry that are just absolutely repetitive and don't take a lot of creativity. Because at one stage or another, whether it's driving vehicles or whatever, where technology can take over, it's going to try to. Whenever there are strategic advantages, cost-wise, time-wise, productivity-wise, and so on, we will be pushing to make operations more productive, obviously. So, I think the key word there, Dev, is creativity, and we need kids, we need people. I mean, adults in the companies that they're working with right now. How often are we hearing "think out of the box"? And yet we put kids in boxes called classrooms and give them prescribed, kind of arbitrary content. And we say, sit there for 12 years, and when we fill your heads with everything that you're going to need, we'll turn you loose. And that's absolute. I mean, we've got Google now. We've got Siri. We've got lots of ways to get instant answers. We don't have to lose too many bets anymore because we can check very quickly. So the idea is we've got to get kids thinking. And the irony is that kindergarten kids and primary school kids are far more creative than adults. In fact, student engagement, emotional engagement with school starts in the primary grades at around 80%. I mean, there's some kids that just don't really want to be there, but they are. They have to be. And then it goes down. By the time students get to high school, emotional engagement, really, I'm into this, learning thing, is down below 50%. Actually, it's sitting at around 44%, according to Gallup surveys and other, student wellness surveys that have been done very recently. So, and that's because students aren't necessarily learning. There's a lot of play going on in the primary grades. There's a lot of playground time going on. There's a lot of activity. And we know with adolescents, for example, that for one thing, starting them off at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's not great for teenage brains. For another thing, having them sit in class all day, class after class after class, is a killer for adolescent brains. So they need to be up and running and moving around and doing music, art, and physical education and engaging in activities that get them up, working with each other, talking with each other, moving around the classroom, leaving the school entirely and going out into the real world as often as possible, or having the real world come into the classroom to change the pace of the teaching that goes on. We're now, the education system now is really not about preparing. I mean, it thinks it is, but it's not really about preparing kids for life after school. Grade 3 is about preparing for grade 4. Grade 6 is preparing for grade 7. All of it is preparing for university because that's the way the curriculum was created. And we don't need all kids going to university. And frankly, we all know that we've forgotten 90% of what we regurgitated on exams one time or another along the way. And probably never had to factor polynomials since we left school, depending on the career path that we chose, obviously. So I'm really tying learning to what kids are incredibly creative, and they're socially engaged, they're emotionally engaged to ideas like climate, protecting our planet, youth poverty, injustice, so many things kids will really, really, their brains want to latch onto. And if you can tie the learning to issues that kids care about, and then make the learning project-based, real-world, connected to real-world issues, and then blend in whatever math, science, and so on are needed to solve those problems. And frankly, just about any problem that you take on at the community level is going to require language skills. It's probably going to require mathematics. Now, it'll be real-world mathematics, not just memorizing what the curriculum says we're supposed to be doing in the first, week in October. That's a long, rambling answer, Dev, but the key is creativity. And our system is not about creating creative kids. Actually, it makes kids afraid to put up their hand because they might have the wrong answer by the time they've got to high school. So we're beating creativity out of them.
Some of the things that you're saying harmonize so beautifully with Carol Dweck's ideas in connection with how kids can think and be able to master areas that normally they would feel unable to. So AI seems to be pushing in the direction of something that you're actually ahead of the curve on and readying people for, which is the fact that a career is going to require more than ever and more than anything else, creativity, the ability to collaborate well together, to collaborate internationally as well as nationally and locally, and also the ability to think about problems that will only be able to be solved through high degrees of emotional intelligence. Yes, some of the underpinnings of math and science and language and so on and so forth, but above all else, the willingness to make mistakes, to find out through trial and error, and to discover and invent solutions to some of the major problems that are emerging more and more worldwide that affect all of us. So this is incredibly exciting stuff, and it certainly is us past the stupidity of the by-rote education that most of us were tortured through most of the years of our early education, and to some degree in post-secondary education likewise. So it's amazing stuff that you're working on. Megan, what do you think?
Well, I think really the counterintuitive part, like Phil mentioned, is that the younger the children are, like elementary school age, they have this natural curiosity, creativity, innovation, and that is down to the neurological level. I'm a science type of person, and so knowing that neuroscience shows us that children at a younger age are more creative, you would think, the more academically intelligent someone is, the more creative they are, which is not the case. As Phil said, as kids age and get into the high school system, that creativity decreases. And so I think really it's overall looking at what is the purpose of the education system. And from what Phil's saying, and I agree, the purpose of the education system should be preparing children to enter the real world, to enter careers that are going to be at their fingertips when they graduate, which, as we discussed, may or may not even exist yet. And all of the ones that are more rote, repetitive types of tasks within careers, the machines are going to be doing those. And so we need that creativity, and we need to nurture that creativity. And so I think, Phil, you gave some understanding about how that needs to be done. And in your opinion, if I were to kind of just pull basically what you said, that project-based learning where children would be looking at real life things that matter in their life. I guess, do you want to touch on that a bit more and how you think those changes should be made, or a little bit more about what those changes should look like, how you envision the education system in Canada maybe looking?
Yeah, I think this is tough. This is tough on the education system because the people who ended up, well, for one thing, educators get to sit in one side of the classroom for 12 to 16 years before they stand up at the front of the classroom. So they get on-job training and work-based learning for a long period of time. They know exactly what it is to be a teacher, a good one and a not so good one, because they know the difference. And teachers. Teachers have gone through the education system. They successfully, got over all of the hurdles, and then basically came back down to the level that they were most comfortable at. and change positions in the classroom. So the education system largely doesn't know it's broken because it is the world that the teachers experienced. It worked very well for them, and they're back in the classroom now and just perpetuating all the good that they saw in education. And if the whole 16 years is about learning what you're going to be teaching, or a small slice of it that you'll be teaching, I guess that's good. But and I do believe, some teachers decide along that journey that they're passionate and they love this. They just want to be a teacher. And you talk to young kids, because all of us as adults ask every kid we run into, what are you going to be when you grow up, one way or another. And a lot of them will say teachers because they see teachers. Or they'll see doctors or nurses. They'll talk about the careers that they've had some exposure to, which is only a very small slice of everything that's out there, obviously. And teachers are used to bells ringing at the same time, and students all lined up in rows and all the same age in the same class, assuming that they all are passionate for the same algebra at the same time in their life. And so it's, change and marks are critical. And that's how we score this. That's how the education system defends itself. PISA scores and whatever, and Canada's pretty good at teaching people rote learning and managing to keep enough in their heads long enough to do reasonably well on the exams. But that does not prepare them for the world of chaos and change. It doesn't prepare them to tackle the really big issues that we're facing around the world now, with countries lining up to blow each other up again, which just makes no damn sense at all. And kids dying in poverty, and that's in our own country amongst Aboriginal communities that don't have fresh water. And there are just so many real issues that those adolescents, and by the way, adolescents are so much smarter than we give them credit for. And we were at that time too. We weren't given credit for it. But, in some of the programs that I've created, I've been involved in helping create across Canada, that Real Game. It's a program where kids step 15 years into the future. They take on an adult role. They don't choose it, because one of the lessons is if you don't seriously think about your future, you're going to just drop into something, which is the way 80% of the adults working now, they didn't end up doing what they're doing through really strategic planning and research. They just bumped into things, people and events and opportunities and bad news and good news, and they are where they are. So these kids, playing this game, imagining themselves off in the future, they would buy a house, they would buy a car, now if their role paid enough, they would, but first of all, they'd dream about the house and car and neighborhood they wanted to live in. They'd create a virtual community. They'd pick their houses, and then not too far along, they would actually get their job, and they would get their first paycheck, and they'd be stunned at how much was taken off in taxes and whatever. And they would decide whether or not they could afford that 5-acre ranch and the Maserati and whatever. And they're amazingly sharp at saying, "Whoop, I can't afford that. So I'm going to have to give up this, or I'm going to have to give up that. I'm going to have to set my sights a little lower." They settled into it. They budget time, money, values, passion, everything else. And then things happen during the game. This goes on for 2, 3, 4 weeks in a school, and longer in some schools. And at some point, they'll come in one morning, and there'll be a pink slip will be delivered to someone in one of the neighborhoods in the community. Might be an envelope with the principal walks in with, or an HR VP from one of the local companies, comes in and hands out a pink slip, and it's never the student's fault. We've just merged and we've had to downsize a little bit, and unfortunately you don't have the seniority, so you've been wonderful. We'll give you a terrific recommendation, but your job ends at the end of the month. And then they have to deal with that. And, amazingly, these kids who are 11, 12, 13, some of them will cry because they're so invested in the life that they've created for themselves, and it's totally imaginary, that this is just devastating when they lose their job. And you have to be careful not to do this to someone whose dad or mom just did lose their job, because it gets very personal. Anyway, what I'm saying is, then they brainstorm, what can you do about that? And those kids in that game are as wise as any group of adults I've heard around the water cooler in any of the employment settings I've been in throughout my life. I mean, put them in adult settings with real adult challenges and make it feel real enough that they buy in. They just totally buy in. They're brilliant. An example that good friends in Scotland told me about as they were adopting our blueprint from Canada for Scotland was a community in Scotland where they were going to have to change the right-of-ways and routing of roads and traffic and so on around an airport in Scotland. And, the city council and planners and consultants have been dealing with this for quite a long time. It was actually a grade 7 middle school class over there that came up with the solution. They just the problem was laid out exactly the way it was laid out for the adults, and the kids were able to think a little bit more out of the box and try a whole bunch of silly ideas, but a few pretty dazzling ideas. And the silly ideas weren't laughed at, and the dazzling ideas were just taken on by the whole group. And so we've got these little adolescent brains, and not even so much at the primary level where they're playing, they're definitely engaged in having fun. But, from grade 6 or grade 7 on, amazing brain growth can happen during that period if kids are engaged in things they give a damn about and they really care about. And then they can take on very difficult math concepts and science concepts and history concepts and so on when they're into that kind of a situation. And, math does not take 12 years to learn. I mean, we don't use 12 years worth of math most of our lives. So in the right context where kids are thoroughly engaged, they can do prodigious things. They can be really quite amazing. And so we have to get out of this. The teacher is at the front of the room, the dispenser of knowledge, flicking the pages on a textbook, deciding what content is going to be covered today, whether the kids are asleep or cared or still with the teacher or not. And it has to go more to teachers, basically deciding what is it. And by the way, ages, you can mix up kids in the 4th and 5th grades with kids in the 9th and 10th grades. And that's the way it is in real life when you get out of school anyway. They're not all the same age as you. And the more creative young people can often spur amazing ideas from the older kids that are there. So anyway, teachers the hard part is for teachers who are used to using the same lesson plan. They know how it works. They know what the results are when they do this. They know they're satisfactory or whatever. And so, off the old bell curve and into much more spontaneous off-road travel in terms of the learning. A teacher won't even know where it's going to go often, but they're going to be a guide on the journey and just trust the process. And as long as the kids are fully engaged and on task, that's just great wherever it goes. And, schools that have adopted this, and there are quite a few, unfortunately, they're just all disconnected, spread out. Nobody beyond their community knows about them, and there's no rhyme or reason to introducing, these ideas that really work and scaling them to a whole country as opposed to trying to just grow them a little bit to the next community over. So that's my passion with this coalition is getting those players together across Canada who know that. 1 out of 2 kids who come out of the post-secondary system right now, between 16 and 30 years old, they're unemployed, they're underemployed, they're doing something they hate, they're getting minimum wage, they're in precarious, they don't know how long the gig's going to last. They can't get a mortgage from a bank. They can't even get out of their parents' basements in many cases, which is tormenting the parents, obviously, who wonder when their kids are going to grow up. And it's not a failing of the kids. They just have not been prepared in not even for financial management or relationship building or what do I do with real estate or consumer there's so many things that really are important. and what's really going on in the world, and what are the trends. And if we get creative, what do I love? What am I passionate about? And what issues can I hook onto? And maybe I'm doing that with people from around the world, or maybe I'm doing it with people from Toronto, or wherever it might be in Canada. But we have to prepare all kids with an entrepreneurial mindset, because for the gig economy, which is now well with us and probably was only going to get giggier, we need kids who can come up with brand new ideas, who can sell those ideas and convince others, can work with other people in the team to pull them off, have the grit to take the hits when they come, because it's not all going to go smoothly and it's not all going to happen as fast as you want it to. But collaborating with others is cheating in the school system, and they've never been really challenged to get those brains clicking on huge new ideas together, and preparing them for doing exactly the same thing as adults.
So, look, Phil, when you look at the coalition that you're building, that you've built, yeah, or that you're taking and just augmenting, perhaps one day internationally, globally, what do you see as some of the biggest risks and challenges that you have in building and sustaining the coalition, and how are you going about overcoming these risks?
Yeah, okay. Well, the big risk in the last coalition that I built, that Canada Career Information Partnership, which became a model for 4 other countries, by the way, was that the federal funders and the provincial funders, and what I found with government is it's only a matter of time before any great idea is killed by the next ego coming in that wants a new idea. So the sustainability really is tricky with governments that last for 4 or 5 years, and then you could be starting from scratch and building relationships again and funding. And much of what I'm talking about, I don't believe can be done on a commercial basis. If I was representing a major private company, all the provinces and the Aboriginal community, the business community, would not come together to help me create success for my company. So this has to be, it can't be the federal government leading it, because then there's all the issues of jurisdiction, and this isn't your territory. What are you doing here? And I had this conversation a couple of years ago with Justin Trudeau, actually, in his riding office in Papineau. And we discussed some of the projects that had happened in the past and why they worked. And so his conclusion at the end of that conversation, which was supposed to be half an hour and went over an hour in his office, was so you're saying the role for the federal government should be a convening role in K-12 education. And by the way, you did say perhaps broader, Megan, and I think certainly it's the issues we're talking about touch Canadians of all ages. But my real focus is the K-12 system. We have no leadership, no coordination, no real coherence across the country. We have ministers who meet from time to time, share ideas, and then pass things on to their deputies and others who, will come up with 13 ways of either not doing anything with it or doing their own thing with it. And so I think the federal government has to be on board, and this federal government seems to want to be on board, because then you're all working for the Canadian flag. I mean, and we all want. We may not want to make things better for Albertans, but we want to make things better for Canada. All of us do. It's in our DNA. So the Canadian government, and so that's why I've been talking with Employment Social Development, and they're certainly keen. They know they have no jurisdiction in K-12, but they've said if the provinces want some help from us in creating a safe playground for everyone to come together and work on issues that are priorities everywhere across the country, and do it once spectacularly as opposed to doing it 13 times as you're doing 20 other things. So once we get the buy-in on the idea, and the provinces are on board, and they're building, and they're testing, and then the program is launched, our notion is, as with past programs, There would be a modest cost. It would not be for-profit pricing, but there would be a modest cost, far less than any province could actually create these products, resources, programs, apps, whatever they turn out to be, and there'll be all of those things actually. And the cost would then come back to the not-for-profit coalition to be reinvested in future products. So, and not only that, every project that I've worked on that got all Canadians together across the country went international. So there are revenues that could come back from many other countries that are all facing exactly the same kind of challenges. And the way we would start, Deb, would be there are a list of about 20 different projects where there are spectacular things going on in certain places across Canada that nobody else knows about. And so our focus initially would be on best practice. What things are happening now that are really working? And can we take that notion to an advisory group from across Canada, and with those advisors say, okay, that looks pretty fantastic, and we'd like to try it, but we'd also like to have it do a little bit of this and a little bit more of that. So you even take the best practice and make it better, and then pilot across the country, get the feedback from everybody involved, and make it better again. And then let it go through the Departments of Education, Departments of Labor, United Ways, community-based organizations, whatever, at baseline, not-for-profit pricing, so it's affordable for anyone. But again, there is a small return that comes back to the coalition, but it has to be reinvested in sustaining that product or building new products.
Wow. So I'm almost at a loss for words because it's just so much information and it's such a drastic shift. But from what I'm hearing, it's really about engaging all of the provinces to make this national level transition. And I think even this is going back to earlier in what you were speaking about, Phil, but at this point, things are so globalized. Back, if I think back 50 years or 60 years or longer, when the education system was kind of developed the way it was and everything was run provincially as opposed to nationally, it might have made sense at that time, because if you're in Saskatchewan, and you're going to stay in Saskatchewan, what you learn and what you might choose as a career is probably going to be in Saskatchewan versus New Brunswick and staying in New Brunswick, where now people are so transitory. People can move. And so really to build this at a national level only makes sense. And like you're saying, it can be taken on and absorbed and used in other countries too. But one thing I'm wondering about, and I'm just curious if you could touch on a little bit, is I think you sent me an article a little while ago. It was one of the Scandinavian countries. Was it Finland, where they're already implementing something like this?
Yes, Finland. Actually, in the early 90s, Finland decided that they wanted to make their education system much more engaging. So they shifted in the direction of project-based learning and real-world connected learning. And of course, there was pushback from teachers in the systems, the system itself, unions and others, thinking that, we know education better than anybody else does, and we know it doesn't need to change. But slowly but surely, they managed to move to project-based. They found out that kids were far more engaged, love going to school. They work in teams, multi-age teams often. They present their findings to public presentations of parents and business people, community people, and so on. The teachers as guides on this journey as they take on these really neat projects that the kids do actually end up having way more fun. And there's way less weight on their shoulders because they don't have to perform, for an hour in a given subject every day and then do it, keep doing it. Because they're learners on the journey, they're guides on the journey, but they're learning too, as the kids are learning. So eventually they built up momentum and the system really, and they were not trying to improve their marks. Finland back in the mid-90s was middle of the pack in terms of educational results with PISA. Now, if you look at the latest finding from PISA, the 2015 finding, which is the latest that has been published, Finland is number one in the world. So
Wow.
they weren't focusing on focusing on marks, and they weren't focusing on cramming information into kids' heads. They were letting the learning happen naturally, the way adolescents learn naturally, and they got spectacular results. Now, starting this September, Finland is going to drop subjects entirely. School will not be about math class and science class and whatever other class. It will be about learning, and it will all be about real issues, real problems that we as a world need to solve. And we might as well engage our adolescent minds when they're really, really keen on taking on big issues and actually coming up with solutions that go beyond what many of us as adults who've had the creativity beaten out of us, would come up with. We tend to stick to the patterns and the way things were. Finland has right up there with Singapore and Shanghai. They're right up at the absolute top of the pack now, and they weren't doing it to compete with the rest of the countries. They were doing it to get kids much more engaged and learning and get a thirst for learning going amongst the kids as opposed to just going through the curriculum every day.
Well, and I think those the results that have been demonstrated at this point is such great evidence, because in Canada and especially at such a national level, evidence-based practice is always spoken about. And so in this case, there is evidence to show the benefit of this transition. It's intuitive, it makes sense, but there's already evidence elsewhere in the world that shows the benefit of what we've discussed tonight. So I think that's a positive as well, and hopefully will help this whole coalition and change in Canada along the way.
Megan, can I just add one other thought there?
Yeah.
Another country I'll mention, because a lot of countries around the world are trying to emulate the Swiss right now. They're using the old German-Austrian apprenticeship model, but quite creatively. So it's not just sheet metal workers and welders and plumbers and so on, the typical trades that we think of with apprenticeship. Every student from grade 10 on goes to school in the morning and goes to work in the afternoon in Switzerland. And they're not just going to random work. They're learning up to that point as being about, what are your passions? What do you love? What pathways do you think might make sense for you? And they've had much exposure through mentorships and plant tours and short-term internships and job shadowing and that kind of thing along the way. So when they decide what kind of work they want to do, they're doing it with a company that knows something about them and wants them, and they get paid to do it. So, and if they try it for 6 months or 8 months or a year and say, well, okay, now I've learned about that, it's not what I thought it was going to be, I want to try something else, they can try something else. So what happened, and they cover in that half day all the curriculum we cover. I mean, Switzerland's right up there with Canada in terms of test results and so on, and they do it in half a day. And by the way, the Finns also, they do 20 hours of education a week. So there's 5 days. That's 4 hours a day. So they're doing these spectacular results in much less time. And the kids are much more active with physical education, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, back to the Swiss. So kids come out of and about 20% of kids there choose the university pathway. And frankly, that's about what society needs in terms of careers that actually require specific university professional training and so on. The others are all going into banking, financing, physiotherapy, whatever it might be, and they're all doing these apprenticeship programs, and they're all getting paid. So when they graduate in grade 12, they've covered the same curriculum, they've learned everything and more, they've put it to work during the afternoon, and because they see the work relevance to their learning, they're more engaged during the morning. They have no student loan debt, and they have a job when they come out of school. So it's a smooth transition right into a good paying job in a good career field. And by the way, we've still got way too many people in Canada who think that a university degree is the entry ticket for a good job. We've got way too many students who've been going off to university just because they were following the herd and they didn't know why, and they came out the other end still not knowing why, but they've got a piece of paper and they've got a lot of debt, $25,000 to $35,000 on average of debt that they're going to have to deal with, and they don't know how to connect with a good job. So there are models, good models around the world. There are good things happening in Canada that we can spread. We can scale across the country, but we can learn from other countries as well.
I completely agree, and I'm excited to see where this goes. And so in terms of the changes that you're looking to impact and looking to make at that national level with this coalition, if you were to envision this being successful and kind of consider timeline for these transitions, what's your goal, Phil, in terms of when you want to see these changes start taking place? Obviously, as soon as possible, but do you have a realistic timeline?
Yeah, I think we're New Brunswick, where I'm based here, was actually the base for that Canada Career Information Partnership, and about 7 different pan-Canadian projects that went across Canada are used in schools throughout Ontario and everywhere else across Canada, and also went global. So we're seeing the Memram Cook Institute just outside Moncton, New Brunswick, as the likely home for this new coalition. It doesn't mean that New Brunswick's going to be running it, because New Brunswick will have no more say than any other province or any other partner. They'll just be on to learn like everybody else, and to create innovations that will make a difference for kids and teachers. Programs that teachers can use, that kids love, that obviously makes teaching much more fun for the teachers. I expect that we're going to have the coalition formed in the next few months, and I expect that we will be organizing a national summit of key players from across Canada before this year is over, and we'll be agreeing on the rules of participation in the coalition, commitments of the provinces, the Aboriginal community, other partners. What are the expectations? The feds would fund kind of a secretariat function, and also fund travel to bring bodies together. So because it's very hard to get out of province travel in many cases now for many people across the country. But when they do come together, their brains are for free to the coalition, which is what we really need, is the brains. And then the provinces would make a commitment that they would participate in building the innovations from specs right to prototype. They would pilot concurrently across Canada at the same time, so it's all of ours. It's not one province leading another. And they would then get back together as an advisory and decide based on the pilot results what difference. So I do expect the summit to happen before the end of this year. I expect the first one or more projects to be rolling early in 2018. And I think by the time we've gone 3 to 5 years with this initiative, there are going to be people in every community in Canada that know about it and are excited with what's happening. And we will, just as we did with the Canada Career Information Partnership, attract attention from many other countries as well along the way.
Excellent.
And they will, and we'll invite them to come in and dream with us as we build these products, because we can use their brain power too.
So change is coming, and my only other thought is get those kids involved too if they're the innovative ones.
Yeah. It's the Prime Minister's Youth Council, adolescents and young people across Canada. They're right in there with the adults with this whole thing.
Perfect. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for tonight's episode. We ran right to the end, and I think this conversation, it's just the beginning, like you said. Changes are coming. And so I want to thank you so much, Phil, for joining us tonight and sharing your knowledge and what you have in store and what the coalition has in store for the education system in Canada. So thank you for joining us. I'm
grateful for the opportunity to you, Meg, and to Dev. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. And what I will say to our listeners out there, if anyone has questions or comments or ideas that stem from what you listened to tonight and what Phil shared, please do let us know. You can message us through the Canada Career Counseling website, Twitter, or Facebook. So we're always looking for feedback and ideas. And in addition to that, if there's any guests or show topics or other things that you've been craving more of regarding information for your career, please let us know. So with that, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And I hope everyone has a happy Monday. And we will be back with you next week with more Career Cravings.
The career discussion doesn't stop here. For more information about how to transform your career, visit CanadaCareerCounseling.com. And remember to tune in next Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Radio Station for the next episode of Career Cravings.